I wanted to go over this because I felt like it was really important and really important to kind of put like a visual aid to what I'm going to be talking about, and that is friction. Now, friction, I'm going to talk a little bit about friction in terms of the chemistry and physics aspects of it, because I found that there's like a really strong correlation between this idea of friction and problems that we have in the education system of California. So let's talk about what friction is. So first, friction occurs anytime you have one object resisting the movement of the other object through contact. So this resistance tends to generate what's called heat. So you can take your hands, rub them together, rub them, and then you'll feel, oh, they get hot. Now, as soon as you separate them, you'll start to feel that they cool down. And then when you put them back together, you feel that they're cooler than when you were just rubbing them. Now, the reason why that happens is how heat tends to move. Heat moves from a place of high temperature, so in between your hands, to a place of low temperature, all the air around you, right? Which is at a cooler temperature. And heat always does that. Now, friction is a problem when we start to talk about machines, because anything that generates heat means that we're losing energy that we cannot recapture and use again, right? And that energy is not being used to serve the purpose of the actual machine. So the less heat a machine generates, the more efficient it's going to be. So here's an example. An example is like a bicycle, right? So if you have a bike, you can have a simple machine. What you have are the wheels, the frame, you have some gears, you have the pedals, right? And maybe even like the gear shifters on your bike. And so there's places where you're gonna have rubbing. So you'll have rubbing on your feet onto the pedals. The pedals are going to rub up against the axle, which is connected to the gears, which is going to cause some more rubbing. The gears are connected to a chain, which connects to the back wheel, and more gears over there. So that's going to create friction. And then you even have the movement of the tires acting upon the floor, which creates more friction. So all those places are places where energy just kind of just gets lost, right? So when you push down on the pedal, not all of the energy is going to go to making the bike move. Now, if you contrast that to, like, let's say a car has way more moving parts. So inside, if you look in under the hood, you'll notice that, oh, there's just like a bunch of stuff here. I don't know what it is. The big thing in the middle is your engine block. And in it, there are pistons and valves, and there's lots of movement in there. And you also have like all the other components around it. You have like a radiator, you have that little thing where you put your windshield wiper fluid, you have, let's see, you have your air conditioning pump and unit. And so you have like all these different components onto your, on your car. Now, if you take your car out and you just run it, you don't have to take it very far. Just turn it on, run it down the end of your block and back. You'll notice that when you put your hand on the hood of the car, it is really hot. That's because your car has a lot more moving parts, a lot more friction. So a car is way less efficient than a bike is, right? Because there's more moving parts, there's more energy that's being lost, there's more components rubbing up against each other. This idea connects really well with what happened to California's education system. So California's education system started off as just being like this little thing that takes care of kids from first grade to 8th grade, and that's about it, over 100 years ago. But since then, you've kind of added more and more parts to this. So the education system in California has two main parts: the California Department of Education, which is CDE, and the State Board of Education, which is SBE. And these two parts together kind of run our entire system. So the California Department of Education is, if you go onto their website, this is what they do. They are responsible for enforcing education law and regulations, continuing to reform and improve public elementary school programs, secondary school programs, adult education, some preschool programs, childcare programs, and that's it. The State Board of Education, the SBE, is responsible, or if you go onto their website, it says the constitutional duties of the SBE include the appointment of 1 deputy and 3 associate superintendents upon nomination of the state superintendent of public instruction, and the adoption of textbooks for use in grades 1 through 8. That was their initial purpose, right? Now, since then, because we've added like a bunch of laws and parts to this, they have like these other things that they have to do. So setting regulations, standards, instruction materials, and curriculum frameworks, adopting assessments and assigning waivers to statutes and regulations, approving district reorganization, approving charter schools, designating federal funding from Every Student Succeeds Act, approving allocation of state and federal funding sources, and studying the educational conditions and needs of the state planning improvement of the administration and efficiency of public schools, right? Each one of these is a different subcomponent to the State Board of Education that wasn't there initially. So what we've done is we just added a bunch of parts. So the analogy that I think about it as is like, imagine that you have a bike, and this bike started off as like not being a really good bike, right? It was kind of heavy. It kind of like didn't move too well. Like it had like, and so what people started doing is they started adding parts to this bike. They're like, oh, maybe if we add some gears to it, maybe if we add bigger brakes to it, maybe if we add, tassels to it, that'll be pretty cool, right? I like tassels. You like tassels? Let's put on some tassels onto this bike. Let's also attach onto this bike, like a cool, like little spoiler, because that just looks good, right? And I'm sure that'll make the bike better. And we'll just like keep adding. We'll change out the wheels. We'll just add stuff to this bike. And so now we have like this behemoth of a bike, and it's really freaking hard to pedal. And we're not really sure what it does, but it does tend to move, right? And it hasn't made things better. And you can tell that it hasn't made things better because, in California, we spend a lot of money per pupil. I think we're ranked like 18th or 19th. But we get, like if you look at our standing in just the United States, we're ranked 40th in all of the United States. So we're looking at graduation rates, we're looking at suspensions, we're looking at attendance rates, we're looking at like all these parts together as a whole, we're ranked 40th. Now, if we were the #1 country in education in the world, then I'd be like, it's not the end of the world. But we're not. We're actually failing in math if you actually look at our test scores. And so, there's all these countries that are above us on the international stage. So obviously something's wrong, something's seriously wrong and really wrong. And I think part of the problem is that we don't have a set definition for what the purpose of education is, right? So think about if you want to like make this bike better. Well, if you had a bike and you wanted to make it better, first you have to define what the hell am I going to be using this bike for, right? So am I going to be using this bike to enter into a bike race? Am I going to be using this bike to, drive it to work and back? Am I going to use this bike to go pick up groceries or to take the kids to the park? What is it that I'm using this bike for? That's an important question. According to both the SBE and the CDE websites, their purpose is just to provide an education. But education is just like this nebulous term. What do you mean? What is an education, right? What is it that we're trying to do? Are we trying to get kids into college? Are we trying to make well-rounded individuals? Are we trying to make a population compliant to work? What is it that we're trying to do, right? That, first off, that's very nebulous. Nobody knows what the heck they're talking about or what that is. So that's a problem right there in itself. The other problem, so what we need to do is we need to define a purpose for this bike. What are we trying to do? What are we trying to get this monster to do? And that's the first thing. So where can we look to find purpose, right, for education systems? Well, I like Finland. So what I did is I emailed Pasi Sahlberg. Pasi Sahlberg is he basically goes around promoting Finland's education system, because Finland did something amazing. In 1990, their economy collapsed, or I think it was 91, whenever the Soviet Union collapsed, their economy collapsed as well. By 2000, they had such a strong education system that on the PISA international test, they scored number 1, right? So they went from being a rural, right, backwards country to being number 1 in education, and later on wound up making like big products like, like Nokia and stuff. But that is so we have, as far as our education system is concerned, we haven't done that. So is there anything that we can do to make things better, right? Well, let's identify a purpose. I emailed them. I asked them, like, what's going to be the hardest part about changing education system in California, in his opinion. He said, well, first, we got to get everyone on board on what the purpose is. He says that probably the purpose is the holistic development of young people to realize their passions and take the lead in their own lives, which I find really, really interesting, like as a purpose for education. And it seems to correspond and mesh really well with a couple of books that I'm currently reading. Number 1, the book I reviewed last week, Ungifted by Scott Barry Kaufman. Scott Barry Kaufman basically argues that we shouldn't focus on IQ, that there's all these other parts to intelligence that we have to take into account, including intrinsic motivation, including relatedness, including like the leveraging of other things that aren't traditionally supported by education systems, and other skills. And so IQ isn't the end all be all. The other thing that it connects well with is Peter Gray's book, Free to Learn. And he basically just makes an argument that kids just need to play. If you want them to be socialized, if you want them to be motivated, nothing socializes kids and nothing motivates kids more than free play. Play that is uninterrupted by adults, right? Even when things look like they're kind of like sketchy, you don't intervene, right? You let the kids figure it out. That's how you build resiliency. That's how you build stable people. Now the reason why it connects with Kaufman's work is that it doesn't set the purpose to increasing IQ or making people smarter. Like, that's not the goal there. The goal is realizing passions and taking the lead in your own life. So taking the lead in your own life means you choose what you're going to do with it, and you have practice choosing what that is. We currently remove as many choices as we possibly can from students. And that's a problem, because they're not going to develop the skill of choosing if we don't give them true opportunities to choose. It also dovetails with his book, because it's not about intelligence, it's about pursuing your passion, right? Which is highly connected to whether or not you're going to be involved in meaningful work. Meaningful work contains 3 basic components. You got to feel a sense of autonomy, which means you got to feel like you have choices, right? And that you have the power to make those choices and see them through. You also got to feel mastery, which means that whatever task you're being assigned with, or whatever task you're setting for yourself, is the skills to accomplish it are just a little bit higher than where you currently are, right? And you're constantly trying to achieve it. So think of like a game of tag, right? Somebody tags you because you were too slow. So now you want to get a little bit faster to tag them back, right? And then you constantly like move the bar up, move the bar up, move the bar up. And this happens naturally through play and through a playful classroom. So mastery, that's the other thing. And you got to feel relatedness, right? So you got to feel related, like the work that you're doing is important, or the people that you're working with are important. And this is why people in the military, like once they come out, they get really attached to whoever they were in the military with, because those are the people that they that they basically fought for, right? My brother's like a big example of this. He's really strong in that military community because they've been through something together that is very difficult, and they gave them a sense of relatedness. We don't fight for anything other than the people next to us, right? And so if you want meaningful work, you got to feel all of those things. And we got to teach students, right? Or not even teach them, but we have to get out of their way so that they can learn these things on their own. And the only way we're going to get there is we come up with like a unified purpose, right? Now, is this purpose of education perfect? Probably not. Is it going to work well in California? It might. The only way I'm going to know, and the only way that you're going to know, is if we build this together, right? Now, this is my challenge to you. This is my question to you. Can you think of a better purpose for what education should be? Right? Can you? Or do you know anyone that can? If you do, have them reach out to me. lessismore.education@skiff.com. That's Skiff, S-K-I-F-F, 2 F's. And, you know, the other thing that you can do if you really want to help me out is promote this. Promote the channel, promote what we're doing. So you can find us here at YouTube. You tell a friend. If you find this interesting, that's the most important thing that you can do, is tell other people. All right? And with that, thank you very much. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll catch you later.